Something happened to your soulmate that they cannot explain away this time. It was only one moment, almost ordinary at first, but the second they saw it, heard it, or encountered it, your name entered their mind before they could stop it. And that is what makes this so strange. They weren't sitting around thinking about you. They weren't searching through old memories. They weren't trying to revisit the connection. Life was moving normally until something appeared in front of them that felt far too familiar. For a few seconds, they simply froze. Their mind tried to find a logical explanation, but their heart had already recognized what it meant. It reminded them of you, not vaguely, not casually, instantly, and suddenly a memory they thought was buried came rushing back with a force they weren't prepared for. Your face, your voice, the way you looked at them during a moment they had almost forgotten. A sentence you once said that seemed insignificant back then suddenly sounded completely different. They may have even laughed at first and told themselves, "What are the chances?" But then another detail appeared, and that was when the feeling changed. Because one coincidence can be ignored. One reminder can be dismissed. But when something carries the exact emotional signature of a person you've tried to move beyond, it becomes much harder to pretend nothing happened. Your soulmate is now wondering why this happened at this particular moment. Why did something so small unlock something so powerful? Why did their first instinct lead straight back to you? And more importantly, why did they suddenly feel that familiar ache they thought they had already overcome? The sign didn't create those feelings. It uncovered them. And your soulmate is about to discover that the memory this unbelievable moment awakened is connected to something they have been avoiding for much longer than they realized. The sign had already opened the door, but what came through that door was much more powerful than your soulmate expected. Because the moment that strange reminder appeared, it didn't simply make them think of you for a few seconds. It pulled an entire memory back into focus, almost as if something they had buried had suddenly been placed directly in front of them again. At first, they may have tried to brush it off. They may have continued whatever they were doing and told themselves it was nothing. Just a familiar song, just a familiar place, just a phrase they had heard before, just another strange coincidence. But then the memory stayed. It wouldn't leave. And the longer they tried not to think about it, the more clearly they remembered you. They remembered a moment that once seemed ordinary, but now carried an entirely different weight. Maybe it was the way you looked at them when you were trying to hide what you felt. Maybe it was something you said that they didn't understand at the time. Maybe it was a small moment between you that seemed insignificant compared to everything else that happened. Yet somehow, that was the exact memory their mind returned to. And this is where your soulmate became uncomfortable, because they realized they hadn't actually forgotten that moment. They had simply stopped visiting it. There is a difference. Forgetting means something disappears. Avoiding means it remains somewhere inside you, waiting for the right trigger to bring it back. And this sign became that trigger. Suddenly, your soulmate could remember details they hadn't consciously thought about in months or even years. The sound of your voice, the atmosphere around you, the emotion they felt when they were standing near you, the things they wanted to say but never said, even the things they wished they had done differently, began appearing in their mind one after another. It was almost like opening an old room they believed had been locked forever and discovering that everything inside was still exactly where they left it. And then something even stranger happened. They began connecting that memory to the sign itself. Why that particular song? Why that exact phrase? Why that location? Why did this happen now, when they had finally convinced themselves they were moving forward? They may have tried to laugh at the timing, but deep down, something about it felt personal. Not because the universe had to prove anything to them, but because their own emotional reaction was proving something they had been trying to deny. You were still capable of reaching a part of them that nobody else could reach. And that realization can be unsettling when someone has spent so much time convincing themselves that they are completely over a connection. They may have thought the memories were gone because they weren't thinking about you every day. They may have believed that distance had weakened the bond. They may have assumed that enough time had passed for everything to become irrelevant. But one unexpected moment exposed the difference between forgetting someone and simply learning how to live without them. And now your soulmate is beginning to understand that difference. They aren't just remembering what happened between you. They are remembering how they felt when it happened. That's what makes this sign so powerful. Facts can fade. Conversations can become blurry. Details can disappear with time. But emotional memories have a strange way of surviving everything. One sound can bring back an entire night. One place can bring back an entire chapter. One familiar phrase can make someone feel like they have traveled backward in time within seconds. That is what happened here. And somewhere in the middle of that emotional flashback, your soulmate may have remembered something you once said that they never truly understood. Maybe you warned them about something. Maybe you told them how deeply you cared. Maybe you said you didn't want to lose the connection, but couldn't keep carrying it alone. Whatever that forgotten sentence was, it suddenly sounded different now because your soulmate is no longer hearing it through the mindset they had back then. They are hearing it with everything they have learned since, and that changes everything. A sentence they once ignored can become a confession. A goodbye they thought was final can suddenly sound like someone protecting themselves. A moment they considered insignificant can suddenly feel like the moment they should have paid attention. Your soulmate may even wonder whether you experienced similar reminders after the separation. Did something ever make you think of them the same way? Did you ever hear that song and remember them? Did you ever pass that place and feel something shift inside you? Did you ever wonder whether they still cared? These questions begin appearing because the sign didn't simply reopen a memory. It reopened curiosity. And curiosity is dangerous when someone has spent a long time trying to close a chapter. Now they aren't only thinking about what happened. They are wondering what could have happened if they had understood you differently. They are looking at the past and seeing possibilities where they once saw endings. But just when they thought this was nothing more than an emotional memory, one tiny detail connected to that sign makes the entire experience feel far too specific to ignore. And that is the moment when your soulmate stops asking, "Why did this remind me of them?" and starts asking the much deeper question, "Why did this happen to me now?" And then the detail appeared that made it almost impossible for your soulmate to call the whole experience random. Until that moment, they could have explained everything away. They could have told themselves that the reminder was simply a coincidence, that the memory surfaced because they were emotional, that their mind was connecting unrelated things because you had once been important to them. But this next detail was different. It carried something so closely connected to you that their entire attitude changed. Suddenly, they weren't casually remembering you anymore. They were sitting there trying to understand why this particular sign had appeared in this particular moment, and why it had reached a part of their heart they thought they had already closed. One strange reminder can be ignored. One unexpected memory can be dismissed. But when the timing, the emotion, and the details begin lining up, even the most logical person can start wondering whether there is something they haven't understood yet. Your soulmate may have noticed a number they associate with you, heard a phrase you once used, encountered a place connected to your story, or heard a song that immediately carried them back to a moment between you. And the strange part wasn't only seeing or hearing it, it was what happened immediately afterward. Another reminder followed. Then another thought about you appeared. Then a memory they hadn't visited in a long time suddenly became impossible to push away. It was like one thread had been pulled, and suddenly an entire section of the past began unraveling. Your soulmate may have looked around and wondered, why now? That question matters because they weren't expecting to feel anything. They may have believed they were finally becoming comfortable with the distance. They may have convinced themselves that the connection belonged to another chapter. But this moment challenged that belief. It reminded them that some emotions don't disappear simply because people stop talking about them. Sometimes they become quiet. Sometimes they hide underneath routine, distractions, responsibilities, and new experiences. Then one unexpected trigger brings everything back to the surface before the mind has time to build another defense. And that's exactly what seems to have happened here. The sign became a mirror. It showed your soulmate something about themselves that they weren't prepared to see. They may have realized that they weren't simply missing an old memory. They were missing the person attached to it. That's a very different realization. Missing a moment is nostalgia. Missing the person who made that moment meaningful is something deeper. And now they are beginning to separate those two feelings. They may remember the laughter, the conversations, the tension, the silence, the strange little details that nobody else would understand. They may remember how natural certain moments felt when they were with you, even if neither of you knew where the connection was going. They may remember how you could affect their mood without even trying. And suddenly what once seemed ordinary begins to look rare. That is when regret can quietly enter the picture. Not dramatic regret. Not the kind that immediately produces a message or a confession. The kind that sits in the background and asks uncomfortable questions. What if I had paid more attention? What if I had understood what they were trying to show me? What if I hadn't allowed distance to become permanent? What if that moment between us wasn't random either? These questions can become louder because the sign has reopened a door your soulmate thought they had permanently closed. And once that door opens, old memories start carrying new meanings. Something you said may suddenly sound like a warning. Something you did may suddenly look like an act of care. A moment they once interpreted as rejection may now look like vulnerability. A goodbye they believed meant the connection was over may suddenly feel like two people walking away, while neither one truly wanted to. This is why the sign affected them so deeply. It didn't give them a new memory. It changed the meaning of an old one. And when the meaning of the past changes, the present can suddenly feel completely different. Your soulmate may now be wondering whether they were wrong about what happened between you. They may be replaying the timeline and noticing things they overlooked before. They may even start looking for more signs, not because they are trying to force an answer, but because they want to understand why this one moment affected them so strongly. And somewhere in that search, they may discover the most uncomfortable truth of all. They didn't stop feeling connected to you. They simply stopped allowing themselves to feel it. The sign didn't create the connection. It reminded them that it was still there, and now that they have noticed it, they cannot unknow what their own reaction just revealed. But the deepest part of this realization hasn't happened yet, because the sign is about to force your soulmate to confront the emotion they have been hiding, even from themselves. And now, the sign has done something your soulmate wasn't prepared for. It has forced them to stop looking at the moment itself and start looking inward. Because the real shock wasn't that something reminded them of you. The real shock was how quickly their emotions responded. They may have expected a memory, maybe even a brief feeling of nostalgia, but what they experienced was much stronger. For a moment, everything around them seemed to become background noise, and your presence occupied a space in their mind that they thought they had already cleared. They may have tried to distract themselves, change the subject, continue their day, or convince themselves that they were simply being sentimental. But deep down, they knew that explanation wasn't enough. Something inside them had reacted before their logic could catch up. And that is when they began asking the question they had avoided for so long. If I am truly over this person, why did one unexpected moment affect me this much? That question can be uncomfortable because it doesn't allow them to hide behind time anymore. They can no longer say that the distance solved everything. They can no longer use silence as proof that the connection disappeared. They are beginning to understand that silence and absence are not always the same thing as emotional closure. Sometimes people stop communicating while still carrying feelings they never learned how to process. Your soulmate may now be realizing that this is what happened with them. They didn't necessarily stop caring about you. They simply learned how to function without showing it. They became good at keeping busy, good at moving forward, good at pretending certain memories didn't matter anymore. But that unbelievable sign slipped past all of those defenses in a single moment. It reached the part of them that routine couldn't protect. And suddenly, memories they had carefully placed in the past began feeling strangely present again. They may remember your energy more than your appearance. They may remember how safe, intense, confusing, peaceful, or strangely familiar the connection felt. They may remember the way conversations with you could stay in their mind long after they ended. They may remember moments when neither of you said much, yet somehow everything felt understood. And now they are beginning to realize that those moments mattered more than they admitted. This is where the emotional shift becomes powerful. Your soulmate may have once believed that they were simply missing a chapter of their life. No, they're questioning whether they were actually missing you. There is a difference between remembering something and feeling pulled toward it again. One belongs to the past. The other can change the present, and that distinction is beginning to scare them because it creates a possibility they weren't expecting. What if the connection wasn't as finished as they believed? What if the feelings they buried weren't gone? What if the sign appeared at exactly the moment they were finally capable of understanding what the connection meant to them? They may not have answers yet, and that's important. Don't mistake uncertainty for lack of feeling. Sometimes the strongest emotional realizations begin with confusion because the heart has reached a conclusion that the mind hasn't accepted yet. Your soulmate may be sitting with that confusion right now, replaying the sign, remembering you, and wondering whether they should have listened to their feelings sooner. They may even find themselves checking old messages, revisiting photographs, remembering places, or quietly wondering what your life looks like now. Not necessarily because they have decided what to do, but because curiosity has returned where they thought there was closure. And once curiosity returns, old emotional doors can become difficult to keep locked. The sign has also made them question something else, whether you ever felt the same invisible pull. They may wonder if you ever experienced a strange reminder of them. Did something ever make you stop unexpectedly and think about them? Did a song ever bring them back? Did a familiar place ever make you remember a conversation? Did you ever wonder why certain memories refuse to disappear? They don't know the answer, but now they want to know. And that desire to know is itself a sign of emotional movement. Because your soulmate isn't simply remembering you anymore. They are beginning to search for meaning in the connection. They are asking why you entered their life, why the timing unfolded the way it did, why the separation happened, and why one unexpected moment could reopen emotions they believed were finished. And perhaps the most powerful realization is that the sign didn't necessarily come to tell them what would happen next. It came to show them what was already inside them. It exposed the feeling they had been avoiding. It reminded them that your story still has emotional weight. It made them look at the past without the protective distance they once relied on. And now they are standing at an emotional crossroads. They can dismiss the experience and return to the old routine, or they can admit that something inside them changed the moment they saw that sign. But before they can decide what to do next, they have to face the one truth that may be harder than all the others. They may have spent so much time trying to move away from the connection that they never realized a part of their heart was still waiting for you, and now comes the part your soulmate never expected when that strange sign first appeared. What began as one unbelievable reminder has turned into something much bigger because it forced them to confront a feeling they had spent a long time keeping under control. They may still tell themselves that it was only a coincidence. They may still search for a logical explanation. But deep down, they already know the most important part wasn't the sign itself. It was the person they immediately thought of when they saw it. You. That reaction revealed something they couldn't manufacture, plan, or talk themselves into. Before their mind had time to create an explanation, their heart had already taken them back to you. And now they are beginning to understand why that happened. The connection may have been quiet, but quiet doesn't always mean gone. Sometimes feelings become silent because people don't know what to do with them. Sometimes someone can continue living, smiling, working, meeting new people and moving forward while still carrying one unfinished emotional chapter somewhere inside. Your soulmate may now be realizing that you became that chapter for them. The sign didn't necessarily predict a future or promise a specific outcome. It simply brought something buried back into their awareness, and that awareness is difficult to escape once it arrives. They may start noticing how often you appear in their thoughts now. A random song, a familiar place, a phrase someone says, a date on the calendar, a memory that suddenly arrives without warning. Each reminder may feel different, but they all lead back to the same person. And eventually, your soulmate may stop asking why they keep thinking about you and start asking what these feelings are trying to tell them. That is where the real shift happens. Because they can ignore a coincidence, but they cannot easily ignore a pattern inside themselves. They may begin looking at the entire connection differently. What they once considered timing may now feel like missed opportunity. What they called distance may now feel like unfinished emotion. What they believed was closure may now look more like avoidance. And perhaps they will remember the moments when you were still there, when they could have spoken, asked questions, stayed longer, or simply admitted what they felt. That realization can bring regret, but it can also bring courage. Your soulmate may begin wondering whether they should reach out, whether you would even want to hear from them, and whether too much time has passed. Those questions can create hesitation because reaching towards someone from the past requires vulnerability. They would have to risk discovering that you have changed. They would have to risk hearing that you moved on. They would have to risk admitting that the sign affected them more than they expected. But sometimes, a person reaches a point where staying silent becomes more uncomfortable than telling the truth. And your soulmate may be approaching that point. They may not suddenly appear with a dramatic confession. The first movement could be much smaller. They might quietly check on you. They might revisit something connected to you. They might ask someone about you. They might find an excuse to reopen communication. Or they might simply spend more time thinking about what they would say if they ever had the courage to speak honestly. Whatever happens next, don't allow the uncertainty to erase the significance of what this moment revealed. The important thing is that your soulmate was reminded of you when they weren't expecting it, and the reminder awakened emotions they thought were finished. That tells them something about themselves, whether they are ready to admit it or not. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that you didn't have to chase them for this realization. You didn't have to force a conversation. You didn't have to prove that the connection mattered. You weren't standing in front of them demanding to be remembered. Something unexpected simply brought you back into their awareness, and suddenly they were the one sitting with the questions. They were the one replaying memories. They were the one wondering what you are doing now. They were the one realizing that some connections don't disappear just because people stop speaking. And if this sign continues to echo through their life, it may eventually become impossible for them to keep pretending that it meant nothing emotionally. Maybe the purpose wasn't to tell them exactly what happens next. Maybe it was simply to wake something up. Maybe it was meant to remind them of the person they still carry somewhere inside. Maybe it was the moment that finally made them understand that what they called the past still has a voice in their present. So if you've been wondering whether your soulmate ever thinks about you, remember this: sometimes the strongest reminders arrive when someone isn't looking for them. A familiar song can reopen a memory. A certain place can bring back a feeling. One unexpected sign can make someone stop in the middle of an ordinary day and suddenly realize who their heart still remembers. Your soulmate may not know what they are going to do with that realization yet, but they know one thing now: when that unbelievable sign appeared, their mind didn't choose a random person. It chose you. And perhaps that's why they are still thinking about that moment long after it passed. The sign lasted only seconds, but the feeling it awakened may stay with them much longer.